Jordan trying to shake off Starks. Oh, what a move by Jordan! LeBron James with no regard for human life.
12 seconds. Bryant for the win. Iverson against Gill. The crowd on its feet. Allen for the win.
Welcome to the Sneaker History Podcast.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Sneaker History Podcast. Of course, it's your host, Mike, running a solo game today, but we have a special guest with us today from Vans. We have Catherine Acosta. Catherine, how are you doing? I really appreciate you coming on with us today.
I'm doing really well. Thank you for asking. I just returned from Chicago for a big Archivist conference.
Oh, cool.
So, archivists across all industries and fields, so academia, museums, and businesses, such as myself, all attended this annual conference under a national organization.
Oh, cool. So if you guys didn't know already, Catherine is a historian and archivist for Vans. So do you guys share a lot of the same, tips of the trade? Do you guys share different tricks of how you guys go about finding information?
Yeah. Actually, especially for the section that's for the business archivists, which includes archivists from banks, hospitals, and also other brands, consumer product brands, such as Carhartt, Ford Motors, Coca-Cola. The list is goes on and on, McDonald's. We all have to deal with not really functioning in the traditional realm of archives, but really being adaptable and flexible for a business. And it's much different than the traditional archive world.
Yeah, I can only imagine probably different things you kind of have to work around with the business inner workings as opposed to just kind of the pure, the academic side of things, right?
Yeah, I mean, the end goal frequently isn't just putting in best preservation practices or making the collection accessible. It's really integrating it into the business needs at that time. So that obviously fluctuates in many ways. And many business archivists, and I, speak more specifically about my experience, not that so much of others, but it is a generalization that we have to be more on our toes and really have a much wider skill set that goes beyond just the traditional role of hiding in the stacks and bringing stuff together. We actually have to frequently educate our colleagues about what archives are, best handling practices. And then for someone like me and my end, where I was the first one to officially take on this role at Vans, there's sort of a big advantage, but also some challenges with that. The advantage is that everything is first time, in terms of research and re-evaluating the historical narrative of the brand and doing research. You're just constantly discovering all these new things. And that sort of level of curatorial interpretation, my background is museum studies. So
cool.
That world, that level of storytelling and sort of broadening and expanding the narrative beyond what the marketing historically will tell you about the history of a brand has been really one of the key big things I've done here at the brand and something that I'm really passionate about. I come from a really strong history, material culture background.
That's really cool because, I don't think people really think about that so much because, like you said, you come from museums and that's kind of what we expect from museums. Here are these different, pieces of art, pieces of, history from different countries, whether it be documents and things of that nature. I don't think people realize that, when we talk about sneakers, for example, today, that goes into a lot of, what they're doing now. Like you said, what's on the docket, whatever our plans, what we need to bring back from the past, we want to reference, or maybe an anniversary, something big with that brand. Is that a lot of what you're seeing when it comes to kind of the idea of what the brand is looking for, what Vans is looking for? Hey, we want to take this maybe to reference for a new model, or we want to take this for some marketing usage. What does that look like for your day to day there?
It's really been a learning process. I try and do my best to get involved in any conversation across our categories here at the brand when they are looking at something that is really entrenched in history and heritage. Sometimes I have a more active role. Sometimes I have a more passive role. It really just depends. And that's also a reflection of that Vans never had an archive prior to 2019.
Yeah.
So I'm learning how to work with the brand still about 6 years into this role, and they're learning how to work with me, and there's just been a lot of developing those workflows and processes. I think the best example is like looking at the new school. I didn't come in to assist with when Vault released it with Imran Potato initially. But when the brand decided to bring it into our bigger lifestyle category, that was my opportunity to really do as much research as I could. And that was a really rewarding situation from a historical side, because I actually got to connect with the original designer of the new school. His name was Erna. He worked at Vans for about 3 years in the late 90s. And at that time, because the company was so much smaller, he had a lot of creative control over not just the design of the shoe, but also how it kind of, the name of the shoe, the original ad. There was this kind of, again, it was a much smaller company then. So much more autonomy and control. So I got a lot of great oral history and firsthand knowledge direct from the source. And that really impacted, I like to credit that it impacted the way that our creative team then executed the big campaign that came out earlier this year, Old Meets New, because the original ad for the new school from 1998 juxtaposed the old school with the new school.
Yeah.
The story was that, at the time, the old school was about 30 years old. The brief was, how can you revitalize this for the next generation? And he took cues from skate culture and what was popular at that time, the big puffy skate shoe trend. And Vans had also already shifted away from vulcanized product and was going into more cup sole designs. And that was a real reflection of business practices changing, where the factories in the USA for Vans shut down. So that influenced the way that product was being designed and looked. And, those little details get grossly overlooked in the Canada Vans just because it's been really inconsistent in terms of storytelling and how the brand has presented itself. But the late 90s is a really interesting time and a time of major change. So the new school also comes out of that, if you want kind of more of the business context, which for me is really, really important and helps ground the understanding. Now, I know not everybody gets that, and that doesn't get woven to the consumer level. But again, as a historian, you kind of want to be able to contextualize and tell deeper, richer stories that also take into account the collective, the group of so many people that are contributing to the brand.
Yeah. And, saying that, there, like you said, a lot of consumers, there's probably more of them than not who are just like, oh, I want the end product. I don't necessarily care about the story so much. But you have people like myself, my co-host, and a lot of just people who, consider us sneakerheads and who love that background to know where these things came from. Like, how did we go from point A to point B? What did that look like? What was the reason behind it? So being able to hear that and seeing it is deeper than just, oh, hey, we had this one moment in time, but seeing that we had to take that moment and gather back up, go back, like you said, get the oral history from the original designer, come back with something, hey, this is what we did then. This is what we want to take to, transition to this new product. It's really cool to see really just the back end that we don't get to see as much. We get to see the end really cool, like marketing poster or social media post, but it's also nice to see what the thought process was behind that, because again, people like us at Sneaker History, we like to dive a whole lot deeper into it all and being able to know, oh, okay, well, this is the thought of, hey, you know what? It's almost kind of full circle when we talk about Vans and you talk about like the vulcanized product kind of going into the way the rubber cup sole, the puffy sneaker, because early 90s, like you had those other skate brands out there going to that puffy shoe. And weirdly enough, seems like we've come full circle again to that puffy skate shoe, and the new school again, being reintroduced in this model. It is really, it is perfect for the timing again, because that cycle of fashion is here and it makes complete sense. Do you see, like, in your research, do you see a lot of like trends as you're looking at, hey, if you're doing the research side of things, as you see Vans producing product, you see a lot of things just kind of going in cycles?
Yes and no. I mean, you also see how cycles evolve over time. And again, looking really specifically, which is a narrow lens to focus in on Vans. For example, in the early 90s, the brand had just come out of a really tumultuous period in the 80s, which again was on the back end. The company had gone into bankruptcy. They'd come out. The three original founders sold the brand to a private equity firm. So you could literally see the rebranding and all the sort of energy that was going into it. Yeah. But what is really notable, and skateboarding is in formally integrated into the company at this time, but that they're really pushing for their spot in the marketplace as a lifestyle brand. And they're not competing against the bigger sports oriented brands at that time. And I think that's really interesting because arguably you can see that sort of positioning today. Again, if you step out and look more at the history of footwear and what that market looks like. And to see that Vans has always taken this sort of unique and different stance in comparison to the bigger sports companies, footwear companies. I think that's really interesting. And that is, something that we see cycle again and again. And there was really an emphasis on lifestyle, on casual lifestyle.
Definitely.
And that's a really nice, big narrative arc in the history of Vans. And that's when I kind of think more long-term and sort of beyond just the company's history, but where do we fall into fashion history? Where do we fall into American 20th century footwear history from both an industry manufacturing side? And I say fashion history because fashion sometimes is perceived as a dirty word in this world. But the reality is it really does intersect fully. And I think, the sneakerhead community, this is just my personal opinion, should also think more broadly of how the world of sneakers and the culture around it have historically intersected with a lot of different spaces that goes beyond men in sports.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. There's so much more to it. And what the downfall of the sneakerhead community is that they think the group is bigger than what they are. I mean, when you look at it, you have the piece of the pie, the sneakerhead group is like that big, tiny. The general consumer and everybody else for it be like general consumer, high fashion, they're take up a bigger piece of the pie. This is such a niche hobby, I would say, collecting those sneakers and things like that, that people kind of get lost in their own hobby. They don't really see the big picture. So no, I think you make a perfect point of being able to see the outside and what all these interconnections are from, like I say, to fashion. Even though some people may think it's, like I say, a dirty word, they don't want to be associated with the fashion side of it. But it is. You can even see, how Vans grew in fashion. I mean, I remember, man, this had to be, I'm trying to think, when I was in college, I want to say between 2007 and 2011, Vans I remember just crazy resurgence of, clearly the Vans sneaker has always been around. It's been a staple. People have always worn it, but the way it was put in front through, famous people, to some celebrities, the Vans era was, I feel like it was on everyone's foot for that 4 years, that 5 years. It was just bang, bang, bang. That was the most popular sneaker you can get your hands on. And it's just really cool to see that because, again, it's just the eye for things change. And that sneaker was the it shoe, whether it be someone who actually skateboarded, someone who was an entertainer, you pick it. That was such a cool moment to see how everyone really, how it was then. They kind of refocused on that shoe again. Yeah.
And, the interesting thing too, when you mentioned the era is what we call icons today at the brand, four of those really came out of this birth of skateboarding and this birthing moment in the history of skateboarding that was so influential and impactful. And, one of the points of pride I take working for the brand, and I would say others here do too, is that Vans was one of those small mom and pop companies in the 1970s that actually listened to consumers. And you see that not just in skateboarding, but in other pockets of the company too. And that really intimate relationship with skateboarding has evolved over decades.
Yeah.
And it really is authentic. And I think it really sometimes does get overlooked in the way that marketing in the marketplace works today. And again, I think people, unfortunately or fortunately, not everybody cares about the sort of authenticity of brands or pays close attention enough to it. But to really understand that skateboarding historically was very much a niche thing, I would argue it still is, even though, yes, it's expanded into the Olympics and has blossomed into a more traditional competitive sport. But historically, it had such underground grassroots, true literal roots, that those tangents have remained and still very strong in pockets of skate culture. And Vans has very gracefully allowed skateboarding to be a main character in its company story. And we could take ownership of our shoes and making a product specifically for skate. But so many of the people and the other aspects of it, they're really just, we're just sort of lucky that they adopted Vans, and Vans became part and integrate into it. But I like to really frame too, like, for example, with the Dogtown Z-Boy story, my like archival point of view is that is their story. We're just lucky that we're a supporting character.
Definitely, no, that makes perfect sense. Now, when it comes to sneakers, skateboarding, was that something in your past that drew you to this role, or was just a challenge of something new coming from the museum world? How did this role just get into you? Like, hey, I want to try this, or what did that look like for you when you started?
Well, for me personally, I grew up in Southern California in the Los Angeles area, and I grew up very much aware of marginalized identities and subcultures. I'm Chicana, so already there's a long history of the Chicana movement and Mexican Americans in LA developing their own communities and sets of identity. And I got really into punk and hardcore when I was at adolescence. And that also reconfirmed sort of really questioning mainstream culture at large and really participating in smaller communities that were rooted in grassroots and DIY like ethos. Very similar to skateboarding in the 90s and the early 2000s too, and arguably today to a degree. And obviously skateboarding always intersected with punk and hardcore. So my exposure to it was that, but I never skated. But I really, really have an appreciation for the sacredness of subcultures and small communities. And I think that I can apply the same sort of, I understand deeply why these things become a part of your identity and how we express them through the way we dress, right? So whether, and that's across all subcultures. And so there's a real affinity for that understanding and thinking. And so I feel that's how I've leaned into skateboarding. But no, that wasn't my main way for the brand.
Yeah, cool. Well, it's funny. I'm in Texas, so skateboarding wasn't as big here as it was like in, California, even you could even say the East Coast as well. But that was really the first sport I fell in love with before like organized sports. Now, was I ever good at it? No, not really. I mean, I do my best, but it was just really cool to see that. And again, you said it best, just that subculture affected my fashion. I always loved the, skate shoes. I loved, to this still day, skate fashion, like the baggier clothes. And those things I've always just kind of associated myself with from a really young age of like 7, 8 years old, just seeing that, watching X Games for the first time, and, had and burned through, I can't say probably, and how many Vans. I mean, I think I still have one pair left that's like really just nice and clean, but the rest have been literally just burned through from just living in them, which is like, again, like you said, it just perfect intersection of just everything you do with that particular subculture that you're a part of. And it's nice to see it grow though. I mean, it's really from just kind of like, oh, you skateboard, it's kind of weird, to now, like you said, it's in the Olympics. It's something that's a major event for people to see. And it's very, I know a lot of people won't like it because it's not that if you know thing anymore. It's kind of been more made mainstream. But I think that's good for the sport to allow more people to see it, put more eyes on it and help it grow, not only on the sports side, but like I say, the fashion, the sneaker side, the fashion side as well.
Yeah. And I mean, in our lifetime, we've seen skateboarding, various underground music genres just expand and grow tremendously and really get integrated in mainstream culture. So I feel like it's even more of a real asset to really have that understanding of what is sacred to those communities or cultures, because it's slowly getting lost and disseminated into mainstream culture, largely through the internet and through the dissemination of information everywhere and access, which is, again, there's pros and there's cons to it.
For sure. Yeah, definitely so. There are definitely pros and cons, especially with like the social media side of things where just everything kind of gets watered down to a degree. You lose a lot of the soul behind some stories. If you go that route, no, I definitely can understand that.
Yeah. I mean, even like something like tattoos, which growing up for me, I always was like, I immediately got my first tattoo when I was 18. And it was because I associated with like punk and metal and these underground cultures. And then in my lifetime, everybody has tattoos now. It does not designate you to be a part of these certain communities where 30 years ago, it might have meant more of that. It might have been more on the fringes of culture. It's been more accepted. I remember my mother getting really upset at me when I was never going to get a job. And, the irony is I have a lot of tattoos now. I'm almost 40 and she, I have a job.
It's okay.
Tattoos have not deterred that. And, it's just how times have shifted. And again,
Definitely.
These things and how we dress. And so this is where I get interested in sneaker culture, is that they really are signs of telling others, whether we're conscious of it or not, of what we identify with in the world and how we present ourselves and how our identity is shaped. And I think brands also are a big, big part of that. People will say brands don't mean anything. I don't pay attention. I was like, no, they do. And there's choices and there are things that are going on and you're signifying to others your socioeconomic status, race, ethnicity often, also just sort of your taste. All these things sort of are conveyed through how we dress.
Oh, definitely. I always laugh when people say that, I don't care what brand. It's like, but you've been wearing the same, I've been watching you wear the same brand over and over. So you do associate with something. So that's a great point. People don't realize that even if it's not a conscious effort, subconsciously, they again, something resonates with them with that brand, whether it be what they represent, whether it be, again, that subculture. It is something that people will be drawn to those different items, and like you say, it's something you could definitely display probably best with sneakerheads, where, people are so brand loyal to some things. They're willing to branch out to try other things, or, this one is something that I wore because I've been wearing it since I was 5-6 years old. It's always been tried, true for me. So it's really cool to see that that would be a great social experiment for someone to do if they want to get deeper into that thought of why people do pick and choose whatever brand it may be.
I mean, it's really interesting, when you actually get people talking about why they wear what they wear, it's really fascinating. And again, there's no I don't think of it as there's good things and bad things about it. It's just they reflect different things and they reflect also what's going on in the moment. We often think fashion and politics don't intersect, but they do. And the political context of which we're operating in does impact these things. So again, that's my way of thinking about history and culture and material culture and artifacts and objects that I work with, is how they can speak to a variety of different stories and histories across the board.
Now, with so much information you're pulling and gathering, how do you organize it all? What is your system to because I can only imagine there's years and years of brand history, years and years of different sneaker models and people that the brand have worked with. I just imagine this big room of just files. I'm just where do I start? Files and boxes.
It's overwhelming. I won't deny it. It has an overwhelming task, but it's just really building it out into phases, and really there's been an element of educating the brand also on what goes into an archive. I took for granted in my academic background that even though I wasn't an archivist, I researched in archives, right? I went to visit collections and do the, research. Not everybody has that experience or they understand. And traditionally archives are paper, they're ephemera. So when you have objects and it's more akin to a museum collection, artifacts, it is a little different. And so, yes, I inherited really thousands of things from long-term employees and departments of the company. And I am still in what I like to say, the discovery phase of doing baseline inventory and archival processing work. Slowly working with the brand to get the right resources. I just got a space at our office to properly house most, but not everything.
Yeah.
So that's also going to help me shape what is our collection and revisit things like collection policy. We can't save everything.
For sure.
We just can't. So I have to think then and work really, really collaboratively with my colleagues to be well, did this sell well? Was this really important? Is this collaborators? There's certain things where you're yes, that's worth saving. Other things you have to question. And as I sort of continue to build this project out, because it's just ongoing, set it up more as a more functional, accessible archive. I would say right now I'm still, again, it's hunting and gathering, and now with the space, trying to really think, there's so many projects now that's okay, well, we need to retrofit the space to properly preserve things and house things that, requires planning and, getting the company to give me the money to do that. And also, also understanding like what is important. So many people gave me stuff, and there really will be some, museum term deaccessioning. Not everything should be included in reality.
It's like decluttering is like, I don't need this. I need this. I don't.
And you have to think, the best archivists are actually future thinkers, because you have to think what 5, 10, 20, 50 years is going to be important today.
For sure.
So like, it's not, yes, there's so many, we make so many beautiful products. There's so many cool things out there. But what really is going to resonate? And do you have something in your collections or from another era that duplicates the same type of story or representation? So like, if it's just like representing materials or technology, do I already have something that can tell that story? You
say that, and it's just crazy. Like, it just, so sneakerheads have a problem. We buy and hoard things for forever. I mean, you can probably see my background. There's boxes just sitting behind me. But that may be probably one of the best ways I've thought to like maybe look at a collection now. So you've actually just changed my whole world, because now I'm going to think about how I purchase things. Like, do I have something the same technology? Do I have something the same material? And I think that'd be a best way, especially if I'm doing it for, building content around these things. I need to do the same thing multiple times. So that thought process can actually expand to my fellow collectors out there. So if you're listening, because we all have a problem, we need to listen to this and throw away things we don't need, because that is a really good way of thinking about it. Because you're right, you'll be sitting on a ton of things that it doesn't matter. Like you said, if you're before thinking, how will this matter in X amount of years? And I mean, even with Vans, I have to ask, because the materials the shoes are made out of, they typically are tanks. And when it stays, I'm pretty sure most of these are still fully intact, right? Like when you dig through this?
Yeah, I mean, depending on the rubber compounds, which we don't have a lot of documentation about how that has changed over time.
Okay.
But rubber being like one of the main materials in Vans shoes from the 60s to today. It's all the different additives and compounds of it. And you can see in some of the older ones in the USA made days where the rubber has sort of, it started to contort a little bit. It started to bloom. And then the Cupsole products, I mean, the glues and stuff, I mean, this and other brands too. I mean, that stuff really does fall apart. These things were never intended to last forever.
For sure. They're going to blow out eventually.
So, how they age, and so many factors contribute to the aging too, right? Humidity, temperature, the way they're stored. Again, like, that's one of the things is I have to remind people, because they come to me for that here at the company. And I'm like, I'm not a conservator. I know a little bit about that, but conservation is a full-time job.
That's another person. Please go down a hall. Thank you.
You understand how these materials degrade over time, But, obviously archivists incorporate best practices, and we know a little bit about how to handle things. And collectors do too.
Yeah.
And I should say, like, admittedly, I don't collect sneakers outside of here, but I come from a family of collectors. And I also have always collected and held on to stuff. So I think doing it in my professional world and taking some of the things I learned and trying to apply it to my personal side, like, do I need I collect a lot of American 20th century, like, glass and ceramic dishware. Dinnerware.
Oh, okay, cool.
I'm like a weird dinnerware person. It's like a little girl that never grew up and wants to lay dishes out on tables. But, stuff like that, that's just like one of many things. But, you really have to like think like, what is the purpose of the collection? Where do I want it to go? Do I want to sell it and make money, and just kind of fund my collecting practices, cycle through things, make content, tell stories, use it, right? Shoes, you get to use them.
For sure. Yeah, it's collecting just a thing, like you said. It's just so many different things, like shoes. I collect toys, comic books. I'm like, man, I just like collecting things at this point. I think it's just fun to like find things I've always enjoyed. Like since I was a kid, it's just as I've grown older, just the piles got bigger.
I mean, same. I like cookbooks. I have all these different little side hobbies.
Fun though.
Gathering. And I can't remember who said this to me, but they said it to me years ago when I was in my early 20s, and I just kind of started getting into like vintage stuff. And also like vintage fashion too. That's kind of my intersection with Vans, is I've always really liked vintage clothing. Was, if you have 3 or 5, it's a collection, right? If you have 3, it's a collection. If you have less than 3, it's not quite a collection. And then that's when objects start to speak with each other, right? there's a bigger thing going on if you have 3, 5, etc. So.
Oh yeah, no, I understand. I look, as I look back, I'm like, oh, there's more than 3. There's many more than 3. No, as you're digging through things on on a daily basis, and just kind of as you have eyes set on different projects that you're working on, have there been any time frames, any eras within the company that have kind of become your favorite so far, that you kind of see different product or maybe product lines that you've really kind of gravitated towards?
Yeah, I could give two good examples, and they're not going to please anybody who's interested in skateboarding, unfortunately. I'm so sorry. Apologize. One is the 90s, and looking at, again, I kind of mentioned that was a time where the company was really robustly positioning itself as like a lifestyle company. Sure. And you see, like in 1996, for example, that was the company's 30th anniversary. So they put a lot of energy into showing the products, the shoes with models, and really, really also talking about the Southern California heritage. It's also a time where they're taking obviously cues from the bigger like fashion trends of the world, specifically like grunge. You see how that's influencing the way the models are dressed and what they look like. You see flannels and plaids incorporated into some of the product. And you also see skateboarding, but at that point, skateboarding is really small, and it's happening kind of for Vans. And again, Vans has ebbed and flow with its story of skateboarding and contributing to the industry and the culture. So that's an interesting time period for me because there's so much 90s and like Y2K revivalism right now. And so after going back and looking, and again, being a kid at that time, I have some own personal memory or experience from the actual like decade.
Yeah.
And then really the 70s. One of the kind of big like archival research stories, and it ties into kind of wanting to expand the narrative around sneaker history, is looking at the role that women had in the 70s and the 60s, which is not through a sport lens necessarily, but is actually through like a dress and fashion lens. Definitely. And this kind of goes into one of the origin stories of Vans in the late 60s, where customers were allowed to bring in their own fabric and make custom shoes.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's really cool.
Yeah, so Vans, I would say, is one of the earliest known brands. I don't know another company, an American company, that allowed their consumers to actually create their own product that way. And that was an innovation that we credit Paul, our co-lead founder of the company, from industry experience he had at a previous shoe company. And what you see, though, is that phenomenon of customs really is about women wanting to match their shoes to their outfit. And then the company expands it, and they offer it to local high schools to make drill team shoes, band shoes, and anybody and everybody could come and bring their own fabric and make shoes in the 60s and 70s.
That's really cool. I had no idea about that. They definitely have to be the first with the ID, or like these other brands out there let you put your colors. They definitely have to be the first ones to do that. I had no idea Vans even did that. That's really cool.
Yeah. And it's a phenomenon that could happen at Vans at that time because they own and operate their own factories. And the first Vans store in Anaheim, California was at the front of the factories behind it. So they had the control and autonomy to do that for people. Yeah. In the way that another company, in the way that the footwear industry was set up earlier in the 20th century, it wasn't allowed to do that. Manufacturers are manufacturers. They weren't direct to consumer. Retailers, the way Vans was, that was another kind of innovation. It's kind of putting it all under one umbrella. The big department stores or mom and pop footwear stores, sports stores, they were the ones selling product to customers. And so in the mid 60s, when Vans started, all those sort of business practices, which might seem boring and not that interesting, actually is super interesting because it really allows customization has been a part of Vans' story from that time onward. I mean, we still offer custom shoes on our online platform today on our website, but even in the 70s with our first skate shoes, if you look at the original ads for those shoes in 77, 78, 79, you will see that they're being advertised to customize the colors, which is reflecting the need of the sort of skate teams that people had, and the sort of dual colors, the two tones, were connected to the way that skateboarding was developing at that time.
Well, I'd say this blows my mind because now I think of a particular van that came out. I think it was I can't remember what model it was. but then the premise of it was called the factory floor, had all the different.
Nice.
Yeah. And so when you said that, it just made me think, man, is that where the story comes from? Is that?
Yes, they were deeply inspired by that original story. And so they actually kind of used their own imagination to imagine what would it be like when they had the factories to make a shoe with the scraps that fell on the factory floor.
Yeah.
So
I love that model, that particular idea, that color they came out, or the colorway they came out with was fantastic. One of my probably favorite Vans I've never owned. Like that one is one of the ones I've kind of keep an eye on for if I can ever find a fresh pair floating around. But no, that story and what you just told me in that execution, it all makes perfect sense now.
Yeah, and I think so. What's really interesting about that custom story, like I mentioned, was that the phenomenon was really happening with women.
Mm-hmm.
And you see this in the 70s because what survives of these custom shoes, from what I've seen, what I've been able to bring in back to the company and what private collectors have, are largely women's shoes. And there's a niche phenomenon of women doing needlepoint and sending it into the company to be made into shoes. And those are really, really special because it kind of leans into a bigger history and story about the history of women's work. Needlework in the 1960s, 70s being just a craft and a hobby, but historically that being a form of women's labor. And a lot of the anonymous voices behind the anonymous women, and also young girls, who did historic embroidery and needlework at large. And I feel like these shoes, if you interpret them the right way, they tie back into that history. That's how my brain works.
That's cool. I had no idea. Like, you literally opened this whole realm of Vans history I had no idea about. I did, like, again, a lot of it I knew was, of course, Southern California skating. That's really that's what I thought about Vans. But hearing this, the backstory of, being able to customize, mostly women coming in because they want to be fashionable, want to match what they're wearing. It all makes perfect sense. And like you say, a lot of what you're finding now is women's shoes. That's a story that definitely should be told more. I think that's one that, people would definitely, I think they could, especially, young women who are in the sneakers, of course, and then just consumers would definitely gravitate towards, because it's from the start. It wasn't this, some brands out there try to force these stores that aren't maybe genuine, but this is a genuine story of how, hey, we have proof from point A in, 1970s to, 2024. This is how women evolved with the brand. So I think that's really cool. I think that'd be a fantastic story to bring to the consumer.
Yeah, I mean, I do my best to try to pitch these.
Hey, if you need a vote, I got you. If my vote means anything out there to anybody, I got you.
I mean, I think it's also just, to your point, it's like really looking at authentically what is actually there in a company's history, And so it's like, I'm not making this up. I'm leaning into what actually exists and what we have evidence for. And again, it's like the needlepoint ones have been a really fascinating research journey because the company had very little documentation about it. But I've persisted and I've found out that the company wasn't promoting them, but craft stores, not just in California, but actually across the United States, some companies are making these needlepoint sneaker kits where you could stitch the uppers, do the beautiful design, and they had patterns, and you see those patterns repeat themselves. And they were being sold as kits in stores. And then the once a woman or a man, presumably, mostly it seems like there were women doing it. Once they stitched the upper, they would mail it to Vans, and Vans would assemble it into sneaker and send it back to them. And Vans never promoted this. It was just, again, part of that customs business that they had. That was just really, at that point, they're a small company. It's word of mouth. In the stores, local Vans stores, you could do that, but it wasn't a fully national phenomenon for Vans. Yeah. And I think that's a really great story. And again, it starts to, sneaker history gets really, really overemphasized with sport culture, which is also a really heavily male-dominated narrative. Not to say there's not women involved, but they're very marginalized and it's a smaller niche. And I think that if we think more broadly about how what we call sneaker culture today, and how that has evolved for the manufacturing stories and histories of vulcanized footwear to, again, how other demographics have intersected. And also there's a lot of cultural appropriation in there too. I wish someone would talk more openly about that.
Yeah, it's like you're just like pulling teeth to get people to talk about that.
Yeah.
But that's so, man, that's a cool story. Like, again, that's why I love having these conversations. Things I just didn't know that I can just add into my own knowledge bank because I had no idea about that. And I just can imagine like all these just really cool designs. It was like tapestry of just different like sneakers that have just come from those kits, those people who are, going in, like I say, going to craft stores, probably predominantly, from what we see, predominantly women doing this. I can just imagine really cool designs that were out there. So that's really cool. I think that's something that, even for just like maybe a short amount of time, I think they should bring those back out. Just have them, send them back in events.
We've done a few things here and there, but I might, my hope would be that at some point we can really prioritize this story in a way that it's not just relegated to the nerds like me who like it, or there's Vans collectors and fans are also aware of this, and long-term employees and stuff. But I think everything takes time.
For sure. Yeah, definitely. I always gotta play a long game sometimes. But so as you find things like this is a perfect example. What is the plan for all of this historical information? Is it you guys looking to maybe set up a museum, a Vans museum, or you're gonna like compile all this really cool information to like a encyclopedia of all things Van history? What is your dream of that? What do you want it to happen?
I mean, as I said, it's really just still developing and forming. I think that's the exciting part, is that I don't exactly know what the end goal is going to be for us at this time. But my hope would be that I would continue to do more sort of exhibitions for the brand. Okay. So one of the most recent projects I worked on, which is also why I don't have a lot of time to do collections work, was I supported our global skate team with the storytelling and activation around Anthony Van England's recent signature skate shoe model, the Ape 2.0. And we did an event in LA, then we went to Shanghai, Seoul, and we actually did our last one was in Paris. Oh, and cool. I worked very closely with Ave and the lead designer on his shoe, Neil Shoemaker, and some of our other folks in our global skate team to really sort of tell the story of the progress of his signature shoes, his career, which are very, very focused and functional to skateboarding, but through his lens and his needs. And we did this nice little exhibition that talked about key moments in Ave's career with Vans history, because he'd always taken inspiration from the old school, and Shoemaker, who worked on the shoe, also really proportionally kept in mind the integrity of the old school in some of Anthony's shoe designs. So stuff like that again, it's deeper storytelling. It's giving these extra nuggets, and doing a museum exhibition is a really nice elevated way for a brand to take ownership of these stories. So I was really proud of that work, and that just wrapped up this July. This June. So, I feel like those are ways. My hope would be that we'll continue to do that, maybe more robustly, a great Vans, exhibit, or also, my personal goal would be to see if an institution would want to do an exhibit that would speak to Vans or some of maybe the themes that come out of our history. Because, the power of museums and cultural institutions like that is that they really give validation, to legitimizing these things. Because again, this, even fashion at large, it's only been in the last few decades that fashion historians and archivists and fashion exhibits like at the Met have really taken on a life of their own. Yeah. And now see that this stuff that was meant for everyday consumption actually has a lot of meaning and value. Vitra is doing a big Nike exhibition they just announced, which is really fantastic, because again, it's not Nike telling their own history. It's going through the lens of an institution, and the curator, Glenn Adamson, is a great scholar, and true excellent scholar, former mentor of mine. That's why I'm promoting Glenn. Oh, cool. Former mentor of mine and a professor at Parsons School of Design. And his way of thinking about things is not the brand way of thinking about things. So I think that's where the power lies, is when you get other collaborators to help tell those stories.
I think that's always the best way, because when, I think the brand C thing kind of with the blinders on, like, hey, we have to be this, correct about this, and this. But bring someone in from the outside, you're able to come in. They have a whole different perspective, something you're not thinking of. They're able to tell a real story from not only what they see through the timeline of the company, but maybe being able to dig up personal experiences from people, so you can tie it all together and you have this full, robust story to tell around the actual meaning behind this garment or this sneaker. So I think there's a really cool idea in what you guys are doing. It's fantastic. I love just hearing about these things and in a deeper meaning, as opposed to just, hey, this shoe came out in 2020. It was $150. There you go. It was purple.
And I think, Vans, because it's been so connected to these, niche sports and like cultures, all the action sports, we also have great stories and histories with snowboarding, surfing, BMX. I wish I had all the time in the world to really dive deep into all of these subjects, but skateboarding takes the most precedence, and at this time at least. And, the design history in skateboarding is really interesting. And so with the AVE exhibit, it was also a platform for me to start thinking more critically and reflexively about the role that design has had in skateboarding, and specifically through footwear at large, not just thinking about Vans, but other companies too, and what actually is required for a skate shoe and the functionality into it. And so again, my background is design history, so I like to think that way. And that's where I think, like, when you get someone like Glenn Adamson to think about, design in another brand context, that's when it gets really interesting. And I hope that, I am pushing for, in my lane here at the brand to go that way, impact by having, working on like the AVE project, et cetera. But I do think that at large, more companies will see the value in expanding the narrative beyond just always being told from a sole marketing brand management point of view. Because my again, the academic in me and also the rebel in me is always like, question where you get information from, and question how information is conveyed and told to you. If it's only told to you through advertising or other ways, that's one point of view. There's so many other point of views and stories that get lost in the mix. And again, I'm a real believer in sort of uplifting marginalized underdog stories, which is why it's, perfect fit for working at Vans with that mentality.
Yeah.
And I really try to uplift those smaller narratives.
Oh, that is amazing. No, I've learned so much today, Catherine, that I had no idea about. And I love that. I love that I can be able to like learn something new from a conversation, especially with something I love, being a big fan of sneakers, and just getting a deeper understanding of something is always appreciated. And I know that, people who listen to our podcast, they listen to it for that reason, to get a deeper understanding of things that we didn't know about. Like, we'll go into things, just bringing people on like yourself to give us, to educate us on things that were just unheard of. Again, we get the marketing, and that's it. We don't get to see what's behind it. So it's really like being able to have that conversation about that. And I really do appreciate that. And I guess as we start to kind of wrap it all up, what's you finished this one project. What's next on the table? Anything that you guys have your sights set on now that you can talk about, or more just kind of coming down off this last tour and really starting to kind of dig in and figure out what's next? So
I'm going to be taking some time right now to really focus on the physical collections and doing some processing work here in the archive. I'm getting a temporary archivist to come help me. So my focus the next few months will be doing that. Yeah, big win to have help.
Heck yeah, it always.
And because there's thousands of pieces of footwear, apparel, memorabilia, documents, photos that are under my stewardship here at the brand, and getting that sorted and organized, and starting to really think, how can this become really helpful and accessible and inspire employees, collaborators, and think more down the road, future thinking, like, how could this content slowly start to be integrated into consumer facing things? I mean, I've done some work for the brand where I'm either there or I've had really strong curatorial interpretation over historic content. And I'd really like to continue that sort of, push for it, because I think, we arguably can be considered, we're a heritage brand in many ways, and we're uniquely a California heritage brand. And California has a really, really special place in the bigger canon of like American design history in terms of the modernity, modernism, and casualness. I think there's probably a great story or thesis for someone to tease out about the history of athleisure wear and how California and the casual lifestyle that's been associated with for the last 50 plus years, how that has indoor-outdoor living that's very, synonymous here, how that has impacted fashion and the way we dress. So, endless ideas on my end. I hope that, again, processing and doing some collections work is the big goal, but I'm sure sooner than rather than later, I'll be given another brand marketing or design project.
That's cool. I'm gonna have to make a trip down there. I'm just gonna bring my family. It's like, we need a tour. You gotta show us the room. Just want to see all of it.
Yes. We're not technically open to the public, but I do make exceptions and like to bring people through, and I'm happy. Yeah, it's great sharing the collections and making it, sharing the stories. It is exciting. And again, it's all like, it's relatively fresh, because it's like I'm taking, the stories that the Van Doren family have told over the years and really going in deeper and adding like, well, wow, there's this other perspective, or here's the photo that they've been talking about that we didn't know showed this story, stuff like that.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. I think that's so cool, just to like being able to, again, just you're bringing things to light that people don't get to see. So I think that's super cool, and just can't wait to see what you guys do next. So Catherine, you let us know before we finish up. If you like, people to follow you in different places, you let us know. Where can they follow you? Where can they find you at?
So I use my personal Instagram account as a vehicle for speaking about some of the stuff I do at work. So you can follow me on IG. My handle is Bourgeois Spirituality. Again, it's a personal account, so don't get mad if you start seeing non-van stuff on there.
They'll be all right.
It's everything through. I just love culture, design, and history. So I kind of weave in, a lot of different interests of mine on that. But I do show a lot of van stuff, and LinkedIn, of course, too, which is, I'm not super active on there, but I do post, professional wins and etc. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, perfect. Well, Catherine, we appreciate you. You've definitely schooled me today, which I can appreciate. So thank you for coming on. If you guys, again, listen to the Sneaker History Podcast, you learn something new every time you listen to us. So until next time, guys, see ya.
Hey, Nick here again. Before you take off, I want to thank you for listening to the Sneaker History Podcast. Be sure to hop into our Discord to answer this episode's The Last Shot question and get to know our community of sneaker enthusiasts. If you'd like more insights on the trending topics in the sneaker world, I've also recently started a newsletter to share my knowledge from nearly 2 decades of experience working in the footwear industry. You can find the link to that below or go to sneakerhistory.com/newsletter. And last but not least, tell someone you like their kicks today. You never know how far a simple compliment can take you, and we all know how good it feels to be on the receiving end of some appreciation. Thank you for all the support, and we will catch you on the next episode. Peace.